Madam Speaker, first I want to apologize to honorable members. I know it's very late, it's 11:15, but this piece of legislation is too important to be treated flippantly or very lightly. There are major and serious defects in this legislation, and I don't know, to be frank, whether the honorable member from Mikus South would wish to proceed tonight with the legislation, or whether, having done a second reading, that he might want to defer it to a later date, because I genuinely believe that there are some technical issues with this legislation. The second thing is this. The honorable member's historical memory and mine differ substantially. In actual fact, this bit of legislation was compelled or ordained by the Caribbean Development Bank through a public policy loan granted to St. Lucia during the tenure of the former government of 2011. And there were two major pieces of legislation that the Caribbean Development Bank insisted on so that we could have drawn down on that money. The first was the Public Procurement Act, which has been enacted by this House, but to date has not come into effect. And its companion legislation to this act. And then, of course, secondly, this act itself. And I can fully understand, therefore, why that act would have regional content and regional input. So this piece of legislation does not come to Parliament of our own volition. The Caribbean Development Bank insisted that this piece of legislation be enacted as part of that public policy loan. The second thing is this, that I think try as one may from time to time, when regional technocrats draft bills in the region, especially when they're not from the region, they sometimes tend to fall into error because they don't always understand or appreciate the constitutional prescriptions that govern us, what we do, and how we should proceed. At the outset, I must tell you that I think the bill has some good provisions, and I wouldn't want to be interpreted as suggesting that the bill has no good provisions. I mean, Section 5, or Clause 5, for example. Clause 5 deals with the administration, functions and powers of the minister responsible for finance. Another good provision is Clause 16. I think that clause, very quickly, deals with the medium-term framework and the imposition on the Minister of Finance, the need to make certain reports to Parliament. Clauses 16 and 17, and even Clause 23, which requires that the estimates, as soon as it is approved by the Standing Finance Committee, be made available to the general public on any media. The appropriation law, as soon as it is approved by Parliament. It is true that those estimates reach the public in any event, but at least it is cast in stone that there's a duty on the Minister of Finance to make it available. So I want to be understood as saying that there are some good provisions in this bill. But in equal measure, I find there are some astonishing aspects in this bill. First, for some bizarre reason, the role of cabinet in financial management and policy making is miniaturized. I think if you go through this bill, you probably will find that cabinet is mentioned maybe once, maybe twice. I mean, I can't be absolutely correct. But it is astonishing that a major piece of legislation like this would marginalize cabinet the way it has. And if I may share my own personal experiences, during the period that I served the country as the Minister of Finance, I can tell that my colleagues were usually very suspicious of the Ministry of Finance. They always felt that there were things occurring in the Ministry of Finance that somehow that was not shared with them, even if the budgetary processes were fairly open and fairly direct. But a lot of it, of course, had to do naturally with the power of the Minister of Finance. But at the same time, there was never clarity on what the actual powers of the cabinet were in respect of budget formulation, of management of debt, etc. I say this to make the point that it is a highly dangerous thing for us to miniaturize the position of cabinet, because it's going to lead to even more suspicion. Indeed, Madam Speaker, consistent with the miniaturizing of the role of cabinet in economic policy formulation, we then find a bizarre accumulation of power by the Director of Finance. I will have more to say about this and point to the sections, and there seems to be some confusion between the role of the Permanent Secretary of Finance, who has overall responsibility for the department, and the Director of Finance, who is supposed to be reporting to the Permanent Secretary. But I will come to that in a few minutes. I will argue that there are some provisions in here that have breached the Constitution. And when I come to that, I will explain why I think those provisions have breached the Constitution and why we need to go back to the drawing board. I want to be very clear. This bill has had a long gestation. We need it. We need to make adjustments. But I think we have to go back to the drawing board. I want to start off with the definition section in the bill. And I'm going to go very quickly because I know time is of essence. Now, as a student, I have always known.
Honorable member, I note this.
Sure.
Madam Speaker, I'm not so sure. I was trying to look in the order paper as to how I would do this, but I just want to say that I concur with the member from Vieux Fort South. This is a very, very important piece of legislation. It is late, and given that there are so many potential contentious points, I think it's worthwhile for us to suspend the continuation of the debate on this matter tonight. I would love to get some points from the honourable member, if I can make it available to the Attorney General or anybody else, in that hopes that we can maybe work something else, or whether we, in fact, we go to committee and try to have a discussion on this. There's no way that our government, my government, is attempting to ram this down the throats of anybody. And I agree with him wholeheartedly that this is a very, very important piece of legislation. I thought the fact that it had been out there, that we would have had a better discussion on it. It's my misinterpretation. I'm very grateful for him for bringing this up. And with his consent, I would like to suggest that we suspend the debate on this, and we maybe continue this debate on a time where we can dedicate more time to it, and maybe have it as a singular item in a parliamentary session, because, as he says, it is extremely important, Madam Speaker.
Speaker, I welcome the suggestion that the sitting be suspended to review this bill, but I just want to latch on to a suggestion made by the honourable member. I know that other colleagues of mine have issues with the legislation, and I think it is very important, as you rightly said, that there be consensus on both sides, because this is a very serious piece of legislation with major implications. I mean, a simple example. Provision is made in the bill to insist that statutory boards be accountable. It's a fight all of us have had over the years. But curiously, the bill totally omits government companies Where do they stand? Because they are as dangerous as the statutory boards. So I welcome the suggestion, but if I may, I want to suggest that we really take the opportunity, as we did with the public procurement bill, put a select committee together, 3 on the government side, 2 on the opposition side, with the technocrats from the ministry in the course of the next few days, and let us go through the bill and share our perspectives and come back and complete the debate. Thank you, Madam Speaker.